Part 6. Becoming the Adult. Your inner child needed. How you stop living from survival and start living from self. What changes when your inner child finally believes someone safe is in charge, and that someone is you? Section 1. Healing was never the final destination. For a long time, I believed healing meant reaching a place where nothing hurt anymore, where I would never feel triggered, never doubt myself, never feel anxious, never question whether I was enough. I thought healing meant becoming someone untouched by my past. But that's not what healing is, and perhaps that's one of the biggest misconceptions we carry. Healing was never about creating a perfect version of yourself. It was never about becoming someone who no longer feels, or someone who never struggles. Healing isn't the destination. Healing is what makes the destination possible. Because before you can build a life that feels like your own, you first have to clear away everything that convinced you it wasn't. Think about everything we've explored throughout this series. We've talked about your nervous system, the emotional neglect that taught you your needs didn't matter, the identities you adapted to stay connected, the younger parts of yourself that were still waiting to feel seen, the nervous system that kept preparing for dangers that had already passed. Every conversation has been pointing towards one question: now what? Because understanding your past isn't where your life begins. It's where your life becomes possible. There comes a moment in healing when the questions begin to change. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" you begin asking, "Who do I want to become?" Instead of wondering, "What's wrong with me?" you begin wondering, "What kind of life feels true to me?" That shift changes everything, because survival spends its energy trying to understand yesterday. Growth begins building tomorrow, for many of us. Survival became an identity. We became the responsible one, the caretaker, the peacekeeper, the perfectionist, the independent one, the invisible one. Not because those roles reflected who we truly were, but because they helped us survive environments where safety, connection, or acceptance felt uncertain. Those adaptations were intelligent. They protected you. They deserve compassion. But they were never meant to become your permanent identity. Imagine carrying an umbrella long after the storm has ended. At first, it made complete sense. It kept you dry. It protected you. But if you never put it down, eventually it begins to block the sunlight you've been searching for. Our survival adaptations are much the same. They protected us when we needed them. But there comes a time when protection quietly becomes limitation. Not because the adaptation is wrong, but because your life has changed. Healing is recognizing the umbrella. Recovery is finding the courage to lower it. Because the purpose of healing was never to become better at surviving. It was to create enough safety that surviving no longer had to be your full-time job. This is where everything begins to change. Not because your past disappears, not because every wound suddenly closes, but because, perhaps for the first time, you stop asking your past for permission to live. You begin choosing your future instead. And maybe that was the destination all along. Not becoming a different person, but finally becoming the person who was there before survival convinced you she had to disappear. Section 2. Becoming someone your nervous system can trust. There is a question I wish more people asked themselves, not, "Can I trust other people?" but, "Does my nervous system trust me?" At first, that might sound like a strange question. How can my nervous system trust me? But think about it. Your nervous system has spent years collecting evidence. Evidence about what happens when you're hurt, when you're rejected, when someone crosses your boundaries, when conflict begins, when love feels uncertain. It isn't simply remembering what other people did, it's also remembering what happened next. Did somebody protect you? Did somebody believe you? Did somebody choose you? For many of us, the answer was no. So our nervous system adapted. It learned. If nobody else is going to keep me safe, I'll stay on guard instead. And that made perfect sense. But here's something we don't often talk about. As adults, we can accidentally continue that pattern ourselves. Every time you ignore your own exhaustion, your nervous system notices. Every time you silence your feelings to keep somebody else comfortable, your nervous system notices. Every time someone crosses your boundaries, and you convince yourself it wasn't that bad, your nervous system notices. Every time you abandon yourself to avoid disappointing someone else, your nervous system notices. Because your body isn't only listening to what other people do, it's watching what you do. It's asking one question: will you protect me this time? Imagine a child standing beside you, frightened, unsure, looking to you for reassurance. Now imagine that every time someone frightened that child, you looked away, or told them to stay quiet, or asked them not to make a fuss. Would they learn to trust you? Probably not. Not because you didn't love them, but because love without protection doesn't create safety. Now imagine something different. Imagine that child reaches for your hand, and this time, you don't leave. You speak. You set a boundary. You walk away from what hurts them. You comfort them instead of criticizing them. You believe them instead of questioning them. Over time, that child begins to relax, not because the world suddenly became safe, but because you became safe. That is exactly what happens inside us. Your inner child isn't waiting for a perfect life. She's waiting for consistent evidence that someone will finally stay beside her. And every time you honor your feelings, every time you respect your limits, every time you stop apologizing for having needs, every time you choose your well-being over old survival patterns, you're giving your nervous system a new experience. You're teaching it something it may never have learned before. I don't have to face this alone anymore. Because the safest person in your life is slowly becoming you. And perhaps that's what healing has been leading towards all along. Not becoming fearless, not becoming perfect, but becoming someone your own nervous system no longer has to protect itself from. Someone who listens, someone who responds, someone who stays, someone who chooses themselves, even when it's difficult. Because trust isn't built in one life-changing moment. It's built in hundreds of ordinary moments where you quietly prove to yourself, I won't abandon you again. And when your nervous system finally begins to believe that, something extraordinary happens. It no longer has to spend every day preparing for survival. It can begin spending its energy on something else. Living. Section 3. Boundaries aren't walls. They're evidence. For a long time, I misunderstood what boundaries were. I thought boundaries were about saying no, about being assertive, about keeping difficult people out of my life. And while boundaries can do all of those things, that's not what they really are. Boundaries are evidence that something has changed. Because every boundary communicates a message, not just to other people, but to your own nervous system. Every healthy boundary quietly says, I see what's happening. I won't ignore this. You matter. I'll protect you. When we're children, We rely on other people to create boundaries for us, to protect us, to notice when something isn't okay, to comfort us, to tell us, "You don't deserve to be treated like that." But what happens when that doesn't happen? Many of us learned something entirely different. We learned to tolerate, to minimize, to explain away behavior that hurt us. We became experts at saying, "Maybe I'm being too sensitive. They didn't mean it. It's not worth making a fuss. I'll just deal with it." And without realizing it, we crossed our own boundaries long before anyone else did. Because survival often teaches us that keeping the relationship is more important than protecting ourselves. But healing begins to reverse that lesson. Not by teaching us to become harder, not by teaching us to push people away, but by teaching us that protecting ourselves isn't selfish, it's necessary. Think about your inner child for a moment. Imagine she's standing beside you, watching every relationship you have, watching every conversation, every decision, every compromise. What does she see? Does she see someone who always makes themselves smaller to keep the peace? Or does she see someone who gently says, "That doesn't feel okay. I'm allowed to leave this conversation. I don't have to explain every boundary I set. I don't have to sacrifice myself to keep someone else comfortable." Every time you honor a boundary, you're teaching your nervous system something it may never have learned before. That your well-being matters, that your feelings matter, that your limits matter, that your safety matters. Boundaries don't make your world smaller, they make your world safer. And when your world becomes safer, your nervous system begins relaxing its grip, because it no longer has to stay hypervigilant. It no longer has to constantly scan every room, every conversation, every relationship for danger. It begins trusting that if something isn't healthy, you'll notice, you'll respond, you'll protect yourself. One of the greatest misconceptions about boundaries is that they exist to control other people. They don't. Boundaries don't control anyone. They reveal what you will do. They don't say, "You have to change." They say, "If this continues, I'll choose what's healthiest for me." That's autonomy. Not controlling someone else's behavior, taking responsibility for your own. And perhaps that's why boundaries feel so uncomfortable at first. Because every boundary challenges an old survival belief. The belief that love requires self-abandonment, that acceptance requires silence, that connection requires sacrifice. But healthy relationships don't ask you to disappear. They don't ask you to betray yourself. They don't ask you to choose everyone else while nobody chooses you. The more your nervous system experiences you protecting your peace, respecting your limits, listening to your instincts, the more it begins collecting new evidence, evidence that life isn't the same anymore. Evidence that someone finally notices when something feels wrong. Evidence that someone finally speaks up. Evidence that someone finally stays, and that someone is you. Because boundaries were never walls built to keep love out. They were doors. Doors that allow healthy relationships in, while keeping self-abandonment outside. And every time you choose a boundary instead of betraying yourself, you remind your inner child of something she may have waited her entire life to hear. You don't have to protect yourself alone anymore. Section 4. Living from self instead of survival. There comes a quiet moment in healing when you realize you're no longer trying to understand your past, you're trying to decide who you want to be. And those are two very different questions, because survival asks, "How do I stay safe?" But your authentic self asks, how do I live? For many of us, we became so focused on surviving that we forgot we were allowed to choose. Every decision became filtered through fear. Will they be upset? Will they leave? Am I asking for too much? Should I just let it go? Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I should stay quiet. Without realizing it, we weren't making decisions from identity. We were making decisions from survival. Survival doesn't ask, what do I want? It asks, what keeps everyone else comfortable? And when survival becomes your default, you slowly lose sight of yourself. Not because you don't exist, but because you've spent years looking outward instead of inward. One of the biggest signs that you're beginning to heal is that your questions begin to change. Instead of asking, will they approve? You begin asking, is this right for me? Instead of asking, how do I avoid disappointing them? You begin asking, what happens if I disappoint myself instead? That question changes everything, because every time you betray yourself, your nervous system feels it. Every time you silence your intuition, your nervous system notices. Every time you ignore your exhaustion, say yes when you mean no, accept behavior that hurts you, or apologize simply for having needs, your inner child receives a message. We're still not safe enough to matter. But every boundary tells a different story. Every time you say no without explaining yourself, your nervous system learns, I can protect us. Every time you leave a conversation that no longer feels respectful, your nervous system learns, I don't have to stay where I'm being hurt. Every time you choose rest instead of proving your worth through constant productivity, your nervous system learns, my value isn't earned through exhaustion. Every time you express your needs instead of hiding them, your nervous system learns, my voice belongs here. These moments may seem small, but this is where identity changes, not during the biggest breakthroughs, during ordinary Tuesdays, during everyday conversations, during the countless moments when you quietly choose yourself instead of your survival pattern. Living from self doesn't mean you never feel afraid. It means fear no longer gets to make every decision. It doesn't mean you'll never people please again. It means you'll recognize it sooner. And choose differently. It doesn't mean boundaries become easy. Some boundaries will still feel uncomfortable. Some will make you feel guilty. Some will make you question yourself, because your survival self learned that boundaries threatened connection. But your authentic self learned something different. Healthy boundaries don't destroy healthy relationships. They reveal them. The people who genuinely care about you may not always like every boundary you set, but they won't require you to abandon yourself to keep their love. Because real love doesn't ask you to disappear. Real love makes room for your truth, for your limits, for your humanity. This is what autonomy really means. Not becoming independent because you're afraid to need anyone. Not building walls so nobody can hurt you again. Autonomy means you remain connected to yourself. Even while you're connected to other people, you stop abandoning yourself. To avoid being abandoned by someone else, you stop measuring your worth by someone else's approval. You stop waiting for permission to become the person you've always been. Because every healthy decision, every boundary, every act of self-respect, every moment of self-compassion becomes another piece of evidence. Evidence that your life is no longer being led by fear, it's being led by you. And perhaps that's what living from self has always meant. Not becoming someone different. Finally giving yourself permission to stop living as the person survival created and start living as the person you were always meant to become. Section 5. The life you were always meant to live. If you've stayed with me throughout this series, I want you to pause for just a moment. Think about the person who started this journey, the one who arrived carrying questions they couldn't answer. Why do I react like this? Why do I lose myself in relationships? Why do I feel responsible for everyone else? Why can't I just let things go? Why does life feel so exhausting? Perhaps today, those questions feel a little different. Not because you found every answer, but because you found something even more valuable. Understanding, compassion, choice. When we first began this journey, your inner child probably felt like someone you needed to find, someone hidden deep inside you, someone left behind. But the truth is, she was never lost. She was waiting for someone to notice her, waiting for someone to believe her, waiting for someone to stop telling her she was too sensitive, too emotional, too much, or not enough. Waiting for someone to say, I see you, I believe you, you're safe with me now. For many years, you hoped someone else would become that person, a partner, a parent, a friend, someone who would finally give you the safety you had been searching for. Sometimes they could, sometimes they couldn't, but there is something profoundly healing that happens the moment you realize the person your inner child has been waiting for has quietly been becoming you. Not the perfect version of you, not the version that never struggles, not the version that always gets it right. The version that stays, the version that listens instead of judges, the version that rests instead of pushes. The version that says, no, without feeling guilty. The version that walks away from what causes harm. The version that apologizes to themselves when they forget. And comes back again, because healing isn't measured by perfection. It's measured by return. Every time you return to yourself, you strengthen trust. Every time you choose honesty over performance, you strengthen trust. Every time you choose a boundary over self-abandonment, you strengthen trust. Every time you choose rest over proving your worth, you strengthen trust. One quiet decision at a time. You're becoming someone your younger self would have felt safe beside. And perhaps that's what becoming an adult really means. Not reaching a certain age, not having all the answers, but becoming someone who no longer abandons themselves when life becomes difficult. Someone whose kindness extends inward, not just outward. Someone who understands that strength isn't measured by how much you can carry, but by how gently you carry yourself. There may still be difficult days, moments when old fears return, moments when your nervous system forgets that life has changed, moments when survival whispers, hide. Stay quiet, keep everyone happy. Don't make yourself a problem. When those moments come, I hope you remember this. You don't have to become your survival self just because you hear its voice. You can acknowledge it, thank it for trying to protect you, and choose differently. Because healing doesn't erase your past, it changes your relationship with it. Your childhood may explain your patterns, but it no longer has to write your future. You are no longer simply surviving your story. You are becoming the author of the chapters that come next, and maybe, for the first time in a very long time, you no longer have to ask, Who do I need to become so people will love me? Instead, you can ask something much gentler. Who am I when I stop abandoning myself? Perhaps that is where identity begins. Not in perfection, not in achievement, not in approval, but in presence, in honesty, in courage, in choosing yourself again and again and again. Because the greatest gift you can ever give your inner child isn't a perfect future. It's the certainty that whatever happens next, she will never have to face it alone again, because she has you. As we come to the end of the Inner Child series, I want to leave you with one final thought. You were never born believing your needs were too much. You were never born believing love had to be earned. You were never born believing that your value depended on how useful, quiet, successful, or selfless you could be. Those weren't truths. They were adaptations. And adaptations are not identity. Over these 6 episodes, we've explored your nervous system, your childhood conditioning, the roles you adapted to survive, the younger parts of yourself that still needed care, and what it means to become someone your own nervous system can finally trust. This wasn't a journey about becoming someone new. It was a journey of remembering who survived beneath everything you had to become. So wherever you are today, whether your healing feels gentle or messy, whether today feels hopeful or heavy, know this: every time you choose yourself with compassion, every time you honor your boundaries, every time you return instead of abandon yourself, you are no longer living from survival. You are living from self. Thank you for allowing me to walk alongside you through the Inner Child series. This may be the end of this chapter, but it is the beginning of the life your authentic self has been waiting to live. Next, we'll begin a new chapter together, the Mother Wound series in more depth, where we'll explore how our earliest relationships shape identity, connection, and the way we learn to love ourselves and others. Until then, take care of yourself, and remember, you are always worthy of becoming yourself.